This episode is sponsored by Turn Gymnastics Apparel, the brand dedicated solely to the sport of men's gymnastics. Choose Turn this season to outfit your team with industry-leading design concepts and elevated options for elite performance. Get the design process started today. Visit turn-gymnastics.com to discover the latest possibilities. Turn. Never done perfecting. Thank you, Turn, for supporting the Sam Oldham podcast. Supporting Turn helps us bring you new content every single week from the world of gymnastics. I hope you enjoy this episode of the Sam Oldham podcast. In the men's gymnastics team final that took place at the Bercy Arena last night in Paris, the Japanese team took the title after the Chinese men threw away a 3-mark lead heading into the final rotation. America came out on top in the battle for bronze, and Stephen Nedoroscik mirrored the performance of Sasha Artemev in Beijing 2008 to secure Team USA's first Olympic team medal in 16 years. GB finished 4th, repeating their results in Rio and Tokyo, and held off the strong Ukrainian team. I'm joined in this episode by Hamish Carter, the former Team GB and current Team Scotland gymnast, and this is our story. Hamish, it's good to have you, mate. Exciting competition last night. Before we get into the men's team final, I just want to know, what's it like, Hamish, training around an Olympic Games? So when you're in the gym, you're watching the Olympic Games on TV, maybe. I know there's no athletes from Notts represented at the Olympic Games for Team GB this time. But what's it like? Because it's a different feel, isn't it? It's like a different atmosphere and training. A lot of people are super excited to watch the competition. But what's it like, training in the gym? What is your training like at the moment? I'm imagining it's not very intense because you finished the majority of the competitions for the whole year, right? Although I think you've got Northern Euros, is that right? So what is training like around an Olympic Games time?
Well, to be honest, it's come really quickly. Like, I didn't expect. I felt like I turned around and suddenly we're watching the Olympic Games. Paris is like pretty historic games too, and there wasn't much of a lead-in for me personally. I can think back to Rio and London. And it felt like I was looking forward to the Olympics like a year in advance, but not so much this time. But there's a different feel in the gym. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is seeing the top end gymnastics. Yeah, it seems so far away from you.
Okay,
but also remembering that there are routines that we could score. You know, and I know it's an Olympic Games, and it's not to take anything away from guys that have actually qualified and been in the team, but you know, sometimes there are 12.5s in the Olympic team final, and you're like, wow, you know, that's not. Well, none of us are that far away from that.
Yeah.
But then there's like a 15-1, and you're like, okay, maybe I am. But yeah, it's fun. I'm enjoying watching it.
Is it motivating? Are you find it motivating watching this time? Are you one of those athletes that's, you know, potentially I would imagine Tokyo for you was more maybe the time in which you felt like this is in the lead up to Tokyo, the 4 years into it, you're like, okay, this could be my cycle. Like, this is where I maybe want to be in the mix. Not that you didn't feel that going into Paris this time, but you just find it inspiring watching the gymnastics this time around? Yeah,
and for the reasons that I said, you know, I see guys do skills that are high level. Some of those I know I can do. I also see routines that I am so far away from, and it gives me a positive inspiration to be, okay, you know, if I want to be at that standard, then I've got to start doing those huge skills and those routines and developing more of a, you know, consistent all-around foundation. So it's both, you know, times where I look at that and go, wow, I could, you know, I've got good skills. Like I'm a good gymnast. And then the flip side of it of I need to be a lot better if I want to be even considered in the running for, you know, next cycle or whatever it is, next team.
What do you think is that biggest difference, Hamish, between then that top level of those guys in those top teams that are at the Olympic Games and then maybe where you are now, or where an athlete in a similar position like you, whatever country that is now? What is that big difference between, you know, the great in a country and then the very best?
Yeah.
You know, because I'd personally consider you amongst you know, top 15, 20 gymnasts in the whole of a country, which is an amazing thing currently, and you've been higher and lower at times throughout your career. But what's that big difference between those top 5 guys that are going to represent Great Britain and then the next 5, 10, 15 guys?
I think it's mostly focusing on your own gymnastics and that sounds simple, but it can be very complex when you break it down. I think guys, I look at how people have made their way into teams recently, and some of the strengths are obvious, and it is a clear, direct pathway into the team. Others, in the past too, I'm sure you think about guys that consistently made these teams who you wouldn't necessarily go, oh yeah, for sure, or the name of them wouldn't be, directly associated with the first sort of picks. But I think when you break down your own gymnastics and figure out very specifically how you fit into the team and then work technically on that plan over a number of years, an outsider might look at that guy and go, oh wow, yeah, of course he was going to be in the team. But if you take that guy back 3 or 4 years and you see their floor routine from then, and you go, oh, he's a good floor worker, but he's nowhere near the level that he is now. But if you see how he's made it happen, him and his coach, or the plan, being part of the national squad, and then they're on the Olympic team. Yeah. So from an outside perspective, I've seen the way that people have gotten into the team, and I think it's mostly to do with them just working out specifically how do I fit into this team dynamic, instead of I've got like a massive piece, or I've got like a massive start value or consistency on this skill.
Yeah.
As you'll know, it's like, I think you got to be really specific.
That's very interesting.
If this guy's in the team, then how do I complement him? And if he doesn't make the team, which sort of pieces could I cover, or where is our lineup weak, and therefore where can I make the most impact, or what's my super strength? Where can I dominate that?
Almost being more specific rather than being a bit. I completely resonate with what you're saying there, mate. It's very interesting. Rather than maybe being, I'm going to be so good, I'll be on the team. We're going, no, specifically, like, what if this person here does get selected? What's my best route to getting onto this team? Do you think in that equation, Hamish, you're better to focus on your strengths or your weaknesses? When you think about whoever it is that you may be talking about, and it might not be an athlete in, specifically that's on the team right now, but if you back engineer their trajectory towards being on that team, do you feel that they focused heavily on their strengths and pushed those, rather than maybe focusing on their weaknesses and not pushing their strengths as much? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think...
Is that what you're trying to... Is that what you're kind of...
And specifically I think this cycle, this team that GB have put forward, I think it's definitely been a focus on strengths. When you look at floor lineup with Jake, Harry and Luke, I don't think you could... I think that's the best 3 floor workers in the world. If you took the top 5 guys, I think Jake, Harry, and Luke are in any order of that, if not 1, 2, and 3. So in terms of a lineup for a team final, how can you get better than that? That's clearly a strength that we as a country have worked on, and guys, floor workers like that have worked on. Same with vault. I mean, bar guys like Courtney, and in the past, like Gianni, I mean, I think we've had 5 of the best vault workers in the world, Jake being number 1. Harry's incredible, all of them, Luke, and the 2 guys that, Courtney as well, and Gianni in the past have been amazing. And then you look at like high bar or rings. Yeah. Again, Harry's a historic rings final this Olympic Games, which is the first one ever, right?
It's the first one, yeah. So first rings final ever at Olympic Games,
wow.
Which is a massive achievement for someone that's still very young.
But it's clear we clearly don't have the depth on those pieces compared to floor.
Yeah, and it feels like maybe we didn't. Yeah, we haven't gone right. We've kind of accepted that we're weaker on those 2 events potentially, and gone right. Let's really push the strengths. Let's just accept on those pieces, particularly in the way that I think we approach the routines on those. It's certainly been a case of safe, steady routines, no mistakes, and almost let's hope that the other teams do make mistakes, if that makes sense. Yeah, I completely agree with that sentiment. What were your expectations, Hamish, going into qualification? So prior to qualification starting, so the Friday, let's say, what were your expectations of, let's say, the top 2 teams and then that kind of battle for bronze?
Well, to be totally honest, I didn't expect us, GB, to be in the runnings at all. And I'm not saying that to talk against my own countrymen and teammates and friends, but I just thought America were going to be too strong. You're watching the way they qualified, how their team was selected. You know, they could have made another Olympic team out of, you know, their qualification process. I thought it was incredible. The guys that didn't go from the American team, some of them Olympians, you know, last time round. So I thought they were going to be well up there. And then qualification happened, and I was like, wow, we're going to smash them.
Yeah.
Like, we're looking way better than them.
Yeah.
And we were just talking before we started about the momentum of the event. And, you know, if someone said, this guy hasn't performed in a team final before, you know, is he going to perform in this team final? I think it's more about the momentum of the Olympic Games or the year that gymnast has had. So I wasn't really that shocked before the qualifications. And then when GB turned it up, I was so excited. They could actually bring home a bronze medal.
They looked so impressive as well, didn't they?
I think they looked good. They looked really good.
For me, the GB team was the biggest mystery going in, probably alongside China.
Yeah.
And they were probably the 2 teams in qualification that surprised everybody. I think everybody's money was on Japan going in.
See, that's interesting because
most of my friends within the gymnastics community, everybody kind of had Japan down.
Yeah.
Although, you know, I'd had Catherine from Magnastics on, and we spoke about the Japanese Olympic trials, and she had said the same thing, like, no, I think China going to be very, very strong, particularly in the all-around. But everyone still, for me, it felt like everyone was edging it to Japan. But then after qualification, they just looked completely dominant. I was like, wow, I can't see how, with their rings and parallel bars, Japan are going to beat them. And then I think, for me, GB, again, they just looked so good. And I think all of the routines in which they had a chance of making a final, they hit all of those routines, which is so hard to do. It's very difficult to do. It's not very often that you have, you know, when you go to a major championships as team coaches and as a squad, you have expectations of who could potentially make a final. But to make all of those finals is very, very rare. Yeah. So they did incredibly well, and I felt that they looked classy, solid, and yeah, for me, it was a big surprise. And I thought, wow, once the American team was selected, you know, I had watched the rigorous way in which they'd selected that team, purely on maths, the trials that they had, obviously the 4 days, similar to the Japanese selection system. But when the team was even though it was picked on what was the best mathematical team, it felt to me like they picked a team to go head-to-head with GB. And I think that's probably because Stephen made a team, and he's the pommel specialist, so it just felt like they'd picked a team to go head-to-head with GB. And I really wasn't sure. And I said that when I had Kensley from Neutral Deductions on, and we did our pre-games podcast. Now, I'm not so confident now. I feel like maybe GB have the edge. And last week we sat down and recorded a podcast at the start of the week, and I said, I think GB might do it. I think actually I've changed my mind a little bit. So yeah, that first day of America was a surprise, especially from Brody Malone. Considering how well he did, yeah, those 4 falls in qualification were big, and I just thought that's going to unnerve that team. And then I think Ukraine, again, I maybe had higher expectations. Maybe expected too much from Ukraine potentially, but given their result of the Europeans, I thought they looked incredible. So I think in terms of they have such high difficulty in some of the apparatus, I felt that, like, for me, maybe the Ukrainian team has potentially underperformed a little bit, and in particular probably Kovtun so far. I think he was much better in the team final, but still not quite showing what everybody was maybe expecting it of him, because I think he was probably one of the front runners for an all-around medal. He could still turn that around.
Yeah.
He could be someone that grows through the competition. Looked a bit tired to me. Looks a bit tired to me.
Did Pommel dismount yesterday?
He did.
Did he get given it?
I didn't. So I don't think I watched that routine. That's one thing I'm going to talk about. What coverage you watched, because there was different options. But so expectations prior to qualification, you felt USA.
Yeah, and just to finish that off,
yeah.
I thought China were going to walk up, like, definitely
Really?
going to win.
Prior to the qualification as well.
And in one sense, it's not that I'm still right, but the way that their team broke down with Sun Wei getting injured and them being... I had a brief look at the scores going into the maybe it was going into high bar or P bars, and they were 3 or 4 marks ahead. And I didn't think about them throwing it away. Like, it wasn't a,
right.
I mean, you don't think about that of China, really, do you? You know, here China are going to go and give this gold medal away. You never, as a nation, they just execute. High bar not being their strongest piece historically, but their rings and their P bars, man, they are truly, like, they're head and shoulders above every other country. And the fact that Japan even were close to them with the rings that they have. But what an incredible ending. I was shocked. I didn't think there was anything Japan could do. And then there were 2 falls on high bar, and that was it.
It just shows you, doesn't it, that, like, you have to just stay in the fight, just no matter what.
Yeah.
Like, fight for every 10th. Because it often comes down to just 0.1.
Yeah, the last routine with Zhang Boheng.
Yeah.
He needed a 15-2, 6-6, 15-3. Okay, I mean, that's the best routine of his life. But he qualified with 15-1.
Yeah.
His routine was perfect, going all the way to the end.
Yeah.
And then, as we all know, you come to the dismount.
Yeah.
Is he going to stick it? Is he not? I mean, there have been gold medals lost in the past to that. And there you go.
Really.
3/10 step and a bit of a wobble. Suddenly that's like 3/4 tenths. He scores 14-8, and they get, you know. I wanted to see him do that, because that's like for me, that's the ultimate thing. I'm probably even going to say an athlete could do, maybe even a human being, to have all that pressure to win an Olympic team gold for your country and have the odds against you. You know, he had an impossible task to try and score 15-2. It's not like Nagorny in the last Olympics where he had to hit a good solid high bar routine. It wasn't a low scoring score that he had to hit, but it wasn't a monumental feat that he had to get over. But this routine was that, and if he did that, but 14-8 still. The routine was incredible.
Big score on high bar, isn't it? Yeah, I think he's been, I haven't watched too much of his gymnastics the last few years. And his gymnastics for me is I wouldn't say the biggest surprise, because I've heard the way other people that I respect in the gymnastics community have spoken about his gymnastics. But I think he'd be very difficult to beat him in the all-around, I think. It's just so... His difficulty across the board is just so high. He's so clean. Also, his frame, like, his legs are tiny. How they're so slight, his legs, He's got that big, like, dished back, a bit Yang Wei type back, but a bit, I'd say, a bit more stylish. It looks incredibly light, I'm sure. Be interesting to know the overall weight of each team.
Yeah, that'd be really, like in a rugby squad.
Who's the lightest team? Yeah, it'd be really interesting to know that. A bit like when you're in the UFC or boxing, you've got reach and stuff. It'd be great to see people's physical stats.
And height.
Because I'd imagine that, like, that Ukrainian team's probably the heaviest, right?
Yeah.
Maybe Italians got some big guys in that routine. In that team, sorry. Chinese and Japanese team must be super light.
Japanese has got to be the lightest.
Yeah, you would imagine, right? First few apparatus then, mate. I think up until Hashimoto's mistake on pommels, it seemed like the quality was very high. Everybody was hitting everything, weren't they? From every team.
Yeah.
Every routine I was seeing on the TV screen, albeit you don't see all of them, they were looking like hit routines. So floor started incredibly well. I think they were pretty evenly matched, China and Japan on floor.
Yeah,
I think
it looked like punch for punch. They were just back and forth.
Yeah, and I do like that format. do you of getting?
Yeah,
to, I
definitely.
think for the people watching at home, they get a direct comparison, right?
Yeah.
It makes it a bit easier to follow. I like that they've taken that from the German Bundesliga.
Yeah.
And you get that head-to-head comparison. I think that works really well. It certainly helps with the confusion of the scores.
Oh, I was just about to say,
because you can go, as someone sitting at home, you can go, well, that guy just got a 14-5 and he got a 14-7, so that must be better. Whereas when you're seeing 3 scores back-to-back, and you see, let's say, the Chinese gymnasts go 14-5, 14-1 and a 14-9, and then you forget what they scored, and you can't...
43.3.
Yeah, it's very hard to know, isn't it? So I do like that direct comparison. I actually had to switch over, so they jumped to the kayaking, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
They jumped to kayaking on the BBC. Not that I didn't want to watch the GB guys in the kayaking, but so I flipped over to Discovery Plus, which was Christian commentating. So that was a nice surprise to hear Christian on the other side of a TV screen commentating through. And I have to say, it was really interesting, the contrast in just the feel of the commentary. So Christian was just very calm. And I just had a really nice, pleasant experience. And then on the BBC, it's like, la, rah. It was like quite intense. It was like nice to just sit back and listen to this, nice, calm, cool. And I understand why that is, because I think in terms of the commentary, Christian certainly, it was very much more technical. It was a lot more technical.
Yeah.
He was explaining all the elements. It was just really nice to have that. He's obviously not got as much pressure, I'd imagine, on the BBC. The viewing figures must be so much higher than on Discovery Plus in the UK, right? And they've got the pressure there on the BBC to be trying to translate what's going on in the gymnastics to the general... I would imagine that gymnastics-specific people probably lean towards watching Discovery Plus more than watching the BBC. I think I got that feel from my friends that are in gymnastics. I think most of them watched Discovery Plus, and I think you actually got to see more routines on Discovery Plus.
You could flip between events, couldn't you?
And you could flip between the events, which is amazing, right? So you can pick which piece you just want to watch your team. Incredible. So it's a great thing that they did there. What were you watching? Were you watching BBC or Discovery?
Mostly, we had a few... Josh had his laptop in the gym. We had a TV. The TV was on BBC, and then it went to kayaking.
Yeah.
And guys had phones around, so
you could almost watch everything.
Yeah, we were pretty spread out over the gym, so we would, depending on who was live, I think we had an iPad up, and then a routine came up, and then they all celebrated. We were like, okay, well, that just, we know that Max went through his routine or whatever, and we're busy watching him present, but. Firstly, I want to also just shout out the boys for starting on pommels. You started on pommels in London, right?
Yeah.
Joe, Jake, and Max, that was an incredible. That's really. I know that those guys are sort of my age and even a bit younger. Max a bit older, a bit of a different generation, but that was amazing to watch. As I looked up to them, all 3 of those guys starting on pommels then. That was good, and Josh actually mentioned that you guys started on pommels in London.
Yeah,
and would it happen again this year? So
it's similar, right? It's interesting you mentioned that because we started on pommel in London, finished on floor, took the bronze. America in Beijing started on the same apparatus and finished on pommel. So there was, it could have gone 2 ways, really, that.
Yeah.
So they finished the Americans in Beijing on pommel horse with Sasha Artemev having to do his pommel horse routine, exactly the same as Stephen having to do his routine to take that bronze medal. Now, there was a gap, right, of 2 marks in the end between America and Great Britain, but still, on pommels, 1 fall can... I often say in gymnastics, there's a clean fall, and then there's a fall that's very messy. And what I mean by that is, let's say, for instance, you miss a release and catch on high bar, you miss your Kovac. If it was a clean and there wasn't much, there weren't too many form execution deductions, and you get back up and you do that Kovac, it's just a straight 1 mark fall. Whereas if you miss that Kovac, you don't get back up and do it. If it was messy and maybe you catch it close, bend your arms, then drop down, that 1 mark turns into 2 marks very quickly.
Yeah.
So you're still under that pressure. But it's interesting you say that. We did start on pommel, and the start was so good. And how nice was Jake's pommel routine at the moment? It's beautiful, isn't it? Aesthetically, it's just so clean. For Joe as well, I think for Joe after the European Championships, I think there was pressure on him after qualification. Remember the qualification?
Yeah.
He struggled in qualification. Yeah. I think he would have personally put some pressure on himself. I think he had some comments after that competition, that qualification, maybe similar to Brodie Malone, actually, interesting, like at this Olympics, like felt like he'd let the team down a little bit. Picked it back up for the team final at the Europeans. We won the silver. He did incredibly well because it's a big routine for him to hit still. And again, it is a lot of pressure, man, in Olympic Games. That is it. It doesn't matter how you trick yourself into feeling calm. You know when you walk out, and this is it. This is the Olympic Games. But they did incredibly well. And then for Max, I think being able to go out there and hit 15.2 plus going into the final is going to be huge. So, yeah, the GB guys. And then on rings, you know, you obviously see Harry's routine, 14.8, higher than his qualification routine. I don't think the other guys had bad routines, just probably low difficulty, which is holding us back there. And you put us up against China and Japan, you see that gulf in difference between the difficulty levels in terms of those routines. But we had a great start, and we then move on to vault, and we've got
Luke fell in qualifications on rings, didn't he?
In qualifying.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't see that routine.
When we were watching his routine, and someone said, "Oh, he fell," and we were talking about what the dismounts he had in the locker, and Adam was just like, "He's only got triple back."
What did he do? Hands down, fall back?
I don't know how he fell. Okay. I heard that he did fall. But again, like the pressure of that to his journey into the Olympic team was not last minute, but I think he perfectly executed for him to step in at the right time.
Yeah.
He's the youngest, maybe not the youngest, but him and Harry are young.
Yeah.
First Olympic Games, and he falls in qualification, and then in the team final lands a triple back.
Yeah,
those are moments where I think he deserves a lot of credit for that, a lot of attention, because him hitting his amazing floor routine is one thing. The pressure and the difficulty to be able to do that is huge, and I don't know what he was thinking, but I imagine he was thinking about that triple back for a few days before the team final. So then to come out and land it as he did, and it was a really good routine too. Yeah. So credit to him for that. That was amazing.
And you have to put a lot of emphasis on the fact that there was a lot of pressure on Luke because he was asked to do a lot of gymnastics. You know, and he is essentially coming in quite last minute. I remember that after the Europeans, I had a conversation with him and asked him, "Do you want to come on? We can talk about the Europeans and share your story on the podcast." And his response was, "Thank you, mate. Like, I definitely look to do it in the future, but now I'm going to focus on my training." And I thought, you feel like you've got a real shot here. Not that I didn't believe in him, but at that time, still thinking, look, you know, it's going to be a big call for him for them to put him on the team. But in his head, he was fully, from that conversation, what I took away from that was, you're completely zoned in on trying to take that Olympic spot, which was brilliant to hear that from such a young guy. But then to be asked not just to do floor, that essentially the reason he was selected was because he became the European floor champion. You know, I think you could argue if he was second, he wouldn't have been in that team. I think it was because he was the champion, and he's done that back to back, beat the Olympic champion. So I'm sure looking at the criteria of the selection process, he fits that because of that. And because he is another medal target and medal hope there. Yeah. But he wasn't selected for his rings routine or his vault in particular, or his parallel bars. They came as a byproduct of him being selected, and he was then asked to compete on those apparatus in a team final, which is a big ask, you know. That vault, that Dragulescu, is still pretty new, you know. So I think the one thing I would definitely say is that, and I think Lewis made a point of this on Instagram in his story, because Lewis was there doing the commentary for BBC 5 Live. Even if Luke had stuck his Dragulescu, it wouldn't have made any difference on the day because America were just so good. And I don't think GB lost it. I think America won it. Whereas China lost it. Yeah. Japan didn't win it, if that makes sense. And that goes back to what you were saying in terms of, like, I think I was right in predicting China. Yeah. Because they were clearly 3 marks going into the last apparatus, or they lost that competition. It wasn't that Japan won it. And they did win it because they still have to go up and they're hitting very difficult routines.
Yeah,
but, you know, they were given that opportunity by the Chinese. But also, there were, from both the Chinese and Japanese, just some very difficult routines here throughout that competition. I think Takeki Sugino, the Japanese guy, first time competing at major championships, doing a huge pommel routine.
That was his first major?
Yeah, huge pommel routine, huge high bar routine. He didn't hold back. He went full difficulty in that high bar routine right at the end. But yeah, to hit those pommel routines, then Hashimoto makes that mistake and falls. What are you thinking at that point? Are you thinking China are going to run away with this now?
I think it's happening like qualifications did, in that for some reason Japan are not quite on the form that they expect, or that we all expect, and there are just mistakes scattered throughout this team competition. Almost like not that I was expecting Japan to make a mistake, but it was a bit of, it wasn't surprising.
Yeah, I
tell you what, it wasn't as surprising as the fall on vault and the 2 falls on high bar from China.
Yeah.
So and then China just kept coming up with just great routines, and then they're moving on to rings where they're unstoppable. Vault, I wasn't watching vault when it happened, but I was on high bar at the time watching it. I think I was watching the other stream, so GB would have been on. They were one after, so GB would have been on P bars, and it was one amazing vault, and then passed it to either China or Japan. And then it was better. And then it was another really good, like 14-6, 14-7. And then it was a also really good vault. And then both teams took it in turns to just score like a 13-1 and then like a 12-something. It was like, that's really weird. And then moving into P-bars, China basically have like another rings rotation. But also Japan, if you look at the scores, they have 2 guys in the P-bar final.
Yeah.
Of which I think 8th place was 7th or 8th was Tanagawa with a 15. So they're not exactly poor P-bar workers. You just expect China to just be amazing. But if there's any country that's going to challenge China in P-bars, it is Japan.
If you take Zhu out of the equation, those parallel bar team scores are pretty much exactly the same, right?
Yeah.
So he really is the anomaly there. But I think on vault, if you were to look back after the competition, maybe China did open the door a little bit on vault, and that's maybe was a certainly individual for Sue Wade. That was a knock of confidence potentially. If you now, in hindsight, look back at it, but they did open the door a little bit on vault because Japan had the edge on vault, and I think if you look at the scores, Japan have the edge on floor, vault, and then high bar. But still at that point, the Chinese are so far in front. With parallel bars, I feel like the Japanese are very much technicians. You can tell that in their technique because they're typically doing undersummy halves, stepping instead of hopping. It's very much like classic Japanese technique, whereas the Chinese are almost just so machine-like, power, well drilled, like just you can tell the amount of routines they're doing, the underbar they're doing from a very young age. It's like overwhelming how good they are on P-bars. Do you know what I mean? Like it's same as rings, because on rings, Yang, the ring worker, like. I watched his routine yesterday. To do an inverted cross and open your hands.
I said this to the boys.
I don't understand what you're balancing on. Like, that makes no sense to me. The fact he does his inverted cross, if you watch most inverted crosses, gymnasts have their head tucked out. His head's tucked in.
Forward too.
So you can't even. So you're using a different part of your shoulder to hold that skill. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of round the back more than the front, because a lot of people kind of sit like this. If you remember Jordan Yochev from Bulgaria, had a very like arched back, inverted cross shape. This guy is literally like head in, perfectly level. I just can't fathom how strong he is. Even if you compare him to incredibly strong guys like Courtney or, Petronas, it's just...
That's the strongest thing I've seen a human being do,
it makes no sense to me at all. Like, I don't even know his perception of where perfect is in terms of knowing where the perfect is. It's mind-boggling, that strength. I do have to say that Harry Hepworth's strength is pretty unbelievable as well. The way in which he goes from cross to multi...
I hadn't seen Harry's routine. Because he didn't compete at the British this year, or maybe he did rings, but I wasn't aware. I haven't seen him compete rings
that
many times. I don't know what his routine was with Joe. Even though Joe was changing routines up, I knew sort of what to expect for Joe. I've seen his routines for, probably a decade now, because they were as difficult then as they are now. Like, he's just always been on top. So I didn't know what Harry was going to do. And then I watched him from cross, because he went back up, inverted, roll forward, back up top. And then I think he went Nakayama.
So he went, I think he went backward rise to inverted, which was great. And then he rolled forward, because it was different. It was a really different kind of structure in his routine.
Yeah.
Backward rise inverted, roll forward, backward rise to cross.
Oh, that was it.
And
Press.
then just went to multi, but no lift in his like, that is, from me and you, two guys that aren't particularly the strongest guys on rings. How difficult is it to press up without your shoulders moving?
He didn't even, he just stayed flat. He just almost
just
lifted his legs
pulled
up.
his back up. So, I mean, he's going to have a very bright future, like on rings like that. And he's like his build, right? Like, he's just built for rings, vault.
I think one thing Harry does so well as well is his swing. There have been so many rings workers. Actually, both him and Courtney are incredible rings swingers as well. Not got all this. Even you see it. I think a Chinese guy that didn't even make the team, who's also probably as strong as Yang in his own way. He like does a pull to Maltese and his arms are sideways in his Maltese. They're not back here. They're here. They all swing like Yamawaki Johnsons. They're all very like clunky, very laboured. Yeah. But Harry and Courtney both are so smooth, and I don't know if that's picked up on by the regular sort of watcher of the Olympics, i.e. someone who goes to the gymnastics because it's cool rather than, follow it throughout the 4 years. I don't know if that would be picked up on, but if you're going to get super technical, that skill that Courtney and Harry have, it's, yes, Yang is so strong. There are other guys a bit stronger than both of them, but they are so much more well-rounded.
Yeah, as a ring worker.
And to have a beautiful dismount like they both do as well is another thing.
No, you're right with that, mate. You're spot on, because for people listening, when you watch the rings final, look out for this, because that's really interesting. You tend to see a lot of the very strong guys, when they do their double somersaults between the rings, they pull the rings up and the rings go lax. Mm-hmm. And you'll see it because they'll get a swing, or you'll hear like a thud on the rings. Whereas the best swinging athletes, it'll be very smooth. It'll be really smooth. They won't pull the rings. There'll be no lax in the wires at all. They'll keep the rings quite wide, but they'll have tension on them, and they'll just be super smooth.
Yeah, and silent too.
And aesthetically, it just looks beautiful when they do that. So that is something. One gymnast that does that is Samir. He's going to be in the rings final. He does that. If you watch him on his Jonassen and his Yamawaki, he kind of leads with his back instead of his chin and his heels, which pulls the rings up.
Yeah.
And for me, whether the judges take a slight deduction on that, I don't know. But watching as a viewer, in my brain, I'm taking a 10th.
Yeah.
It just...
There's a bit...
there's something there. There's a slight kink there. That's a way that I can differentiate between your routine and then somebody else's routine. Because the best guys in the world, they're so close when it comes to execution and difficulty. It's the smallest details that make the difference to that overall perception of a routine and the score that comes out in the end, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
So then we go into the last couple of rotations. Let's talk about GB in America then. All this time going into probably rotation 5, we're not seeing that much of the American team on the TV coverage, but all they're doing is just hitting every routine. And it's not necessarily... And then there's certainly spots where it's incredible. So like Asher Hong's Risi Guang and,
best one that he's done so far, I think.
And P-Bars looks very solid. They're all hitting basically mid-14 scores. Then you've got, obviously, Frederick Richards' high bar routine, which I think is big, like hitting a 14.8. That's massive, In
a high bar final, that could be a gold.
Yeah, that's challenging for a medal. Like, when you look at the other high bar scores that day, probably the highest high bar score. I don't think anybody beat that, right?
No, I think him and Zhang may have tied, and even so, I think it would have been
very
given to
close.
Fred. Maybe it was
yeah.
difficult.
So I think Fred did. And apparently he wants to be known as Frederick now. So
okay.
Yeah. So that's something I got. Kenzie corrected me on Neutral Deductions.
Right.
So he's branding himself as Frederick now. So Frederick on high bar, he scored 14.8. Zhang got 14.7. So highest
That was it,
routine.
47.
And I think that was a big routine. And it does seem to me, we obviously had him on the podcast, and straight afterwards, me and Sam were like, well, this guy's a bit special. Like the way he talks to someone so young. He's like someone that can talk the talk, but is actually walking the walk too. Like he's
confidence.
It's almost like in the past, I feel like the Americans have done that, but then not backed it up. Whereas he's talking the talk and he's backing it up, and he seems to have peaked. Like he's timed it perfectly. There was a bit of, for me, I was a bit unsure at his US Nationals. Brody kind of smashed it. Couldn't really see him beating him. And then he got better. Won the trials. Seems to be better again, He was kind of like the athlete that seemed, as the all-rounder, to hold it together when Brody had those mistakes. And again, kind of improved every score almost in the team final. So it's looking very, very good. And I still do think that bronze medal is really up for grabs. Even a silver medal now, to be honest. I think gold, it's going to be difficult for Zhang to lose unless he makes a mistake all around.
Yeah.
But I think every other medal is still quite open. There's like 10 guys that are between, probably, they have the potential of being between 84.5 and maybe 87. So I think it's wide open. And then if Hashimoto does all of his difficulty in hits, he can be there and challenge Zhang. But in a minute, I think that's wide open. But Fred, massive. And the Americans just kept hitting and hitting and hitting. And I think the big difference in the end, when you look at the scores, the GB team had 8 13s out of their 18 scores. And the Americans only had 3. They only had 3 scores that were in the 13s. That's the big difference, I think,
Even that seems like too much difference. In 8 13s versus 3, you said?
Yeah. So 5...
So you think about our top-end scores as well. You've got Max and Stephen as... Let's just say averagely, they're the same score. If they did 100,
they kind of like neutralise
they'd probably
each other
be
out,
right. And then, okay, because I'm thinking 8 versus 3. If you have other routine, I mean, there's 5 routines where we could have improved on our score. So how did we still get beaten by quite a lot, given the fact that we've got like Jake on vault? I know maybe Asher is sort of level, but I'd say Jake's scores higher. Harry on vault, Harry on rings. America don't have a rings worker as strong as Harry. Actually, Asher's still up there with 14.6 or so. Yeah. But to what you said, I know there wasn't a lot of coverage, but I did. We were getting to the last few rotations, 5 and 6, and Liam was looking at the scores going. Because we were looking at Ukraine and us, and then we were looking at China and Japan basically, and then America were in and amongst that as well. So all of a sudden we're getting to rotation 5, and Liam's like we're too far behind, or like there's just this huge gap, and then we go to floor, and he says Jake needs a 17, and then all of a sudden it's like. The whole competition, there felt like there were scores that were adding up, and incrementally we were just losing a few tenths here, there, and everywhere. It wasn't like wasn't like what happened to China, where a huge blip happened, and
going into the last rotation, we were, when you think about it now,
could have gone either way.
It could have gone either way. But
there was a gap.
I think the big difference was high bar. Big difference is high bar. GB and Ukraine both hit a 40, and USA hit a 42.5. And that's then that difference between USA and GB.
Can you remember the scores for USA? So Fred was 14.8. Paul was 13.9, was it, maybe?
Yeah, and then another 14 from Brody. 14.1 maybe.
Yeah,
from
watch Brody's routine. Yeah, it was good. Didn't do full difficulty.
Did an easier routine. And I think that big difference is that high bar. We're sitting there with 3 13s on high bar. And that is the big difference, I think, in the end, in terms of that difference between those team scores. So those 2 marks were where the gap was in the end once we'd all finished 6 apparatus. But
once the dust settled, it's very obvious where it came from, like you just said, because I didn't know the team score for P-bar, for high bar for GB in America. But there was always the hope of we're finishing on floor, our strongest event.
I think we had big scores.
Yeah.
but too many weak spots in terms of the difference between our weakest score and their weakest score. So I think they just were more well balanced. And look, they had more scores in 14s, right? They had more. You know, they're 15 out of 18 routines in the 14s plus. We had, what was that, 10. That's where the difference is. That's the big difference. So I think it was high bar and it came down to it. But I have to say, like, the GB team, I don't think they underperformed at all. One mistake in a team final. The same situation in London. We had one mistake. Depends a lot on the others. I think it ended up being quite messy in the end, mainly with just Japan and China were the messiest, I think. Everybody else, pretty good, pretty solid. We didn't see much of... I didn't pay too close attention to Italy, Canada, and Switzerland because they just weren't really in the running. There's a big, massive gap between them, right? Yeah. But Ukraine seemed to hit and seemed to improve a little bit in certain areas. I think they did. They were a mark up from qualification. It seemed like we solidly beat Ukraine, I think. Going into floor, we had the edge. It was the highest team score on floor by a mile, the GB team score. But I just think when it came down to it, there were just too many weak spots. And the team just wasn't well balanced enough in that setting for a team final. But I think it's...
Which was probably inevitable in some respect, given the team.
I think that was everyone's reaction to the team selection, right? Like, they've picked a team. I think, for me personally, I still stick by the fact that a team was selected with individual apparatus potential and medals at the forefront, and the byproduct was that this is still a very, very strong team. And I think qualification was just a bit of a surprise, but because America underperformed considerably in qualification, and then it was like, whoa, we could really do this. America don't look like they're kind of on it. But really, if you take away Brodie Malone's bad performance from qualification, everybody else still performed pretty well. And so then him stepping back up for the team final, that's been where the biggest difference has been.
Yeah.
You know, and we competed pretty similarly to qualification. There was just one mistake on vault, which, again, wouldn't have changed a thing in the end because America just hit everything, you know, and it wasn't that we lost it at all. America just won it. We weren't ahead going into the last piece. We had to play catch up, and we played catch up because we scored a 44.5 on floor, which is unbelievable. And then we pulled back 2.5 marks, but then they were just too far ahead in the end. And I think, like you said, that was incremental. 0.2, 0.3, 0.5 here on every apparatus that just built up, and it was just too much to kind of make up. But
and well deserved for the American guys too.
And they had to do it, right? Like you know, I think my dad had watched it and he said, wow, the Americans showed a lot of bottle there. Like, to kind of like hit 18 for 18, which is something that maybe that would be potentially a criticism of them in the past in team finals at Olympic Games, is that they've made quite a lot of mistakes.
And Stephen on pommels the last
it is important
event.
to talk about that, I think.
That's... So I was talking with someone recently, I think it was with Clay and Betty when I was in Paris and we're talking about special moments where there's an objective side of the routine. What was their execution? How cleanly did they stick the dismount? Blah, blah, blah. Pretty boring things, elements of that discussion, but they're relevant because you always get a score. But they're on the other side, there's also this magic subjective feeling, like Christian's vault in the 2012, sticking it. People have done that vault better, execution-wise, objectively, than him. I'm sure he did stick it, but I'm sure you could find someone doing it slightly cleaner. Maybe not as high, but he did that in a home games of an Olympic team final, midway through the comp to push the momentum through. Those are elements that you can't measure. You can't account for that. It's impossible to put any sort of figure on that. Only the person who did that routine, I'm sure you've been there, knows that feeling, that exact pressure. So for Stephen, in my opinion, that was one of those moments where, okay, you look at the objective side of this. You know, he's an amazing pommel worker. He's got 15s under his belt. He's willed his way onto the team through qualifications. He's caught a bit of flack for it as well. So these are all things that are bubbling up in the background.
And he's aware of that. As an athlete, you're aware of that. You can try and block it out of your brain, but you know.
I think his character is... I don't know Stephen too well. I know he's got friends in college that I was close with. So I've sort of heard of stories of him, and he's a very, I think, I don't know, happy-go-lucky is the right, but he's I imagine that the way he presents himself, which could be different from how he feels, as we all know, it's just he didn't let that sort of attention and that distraction come in. He just sort of like blasé, like dusted off. I mean, you see how goofy he is, acting. So all of these things throughout his career, he's had a lot of injuries over the last couple of years too. I think his wrist has been awful. And then the Olympic year comes around. He has to fight to make the team. He makes the team. People are a bit, oh, do you deserve that or not? And he's like, well, I'm going to ignore that anyway. I'm just going to keep going and going.
Yeah.
They qualify. I think he qualified in, was it third for the pommel final? He qualified well.
Yeah.
So he's smashed another routine, and then he gets to the team final, and he's last event, and it's him. He's the only one now. Yes, they have a buffer, but the first two guys could have fallen each, and then he would have had to have slayed. He would have had to gone 15. He'd have had to hit an even more perfect routine. So, and he's going viral now because have you seen on the Instagram? He's going viral. Stephen is like, there's memes. Everyone's picking up on photos of him because he's just like sat back asleep with his glasses on, and everyone's like, this is the guy that just saved USA for a bronze medal. But yeah, incredible stuff. Yeah. The way he did that, I think,
and it was a beautiful routine. Wasn't it?
I
felt
got
very
goosebumps
confident
just thinking about that.
Watching him do it, I felt very confident. As he was doing the routine, I felt confident. It's interesting, isn't it, how you get a feel? Because, like you said with the Chinese, I actually felt that something was going to happen. I did not feel confident. I was like, I'm not sure. It's like when someone steps up to take a penalty and you go, he's going to miss. Like, there's just like this. It's that thing that's not tangible. You can't really put your finger on it. It's that thing. You just get a feeling, don't you, off people? But I felt very confident with him doing that routine, and I was the same in that I was with a lot of my friends that from a gymnastics background, not guys that were on the Team GB team, but from my Loughborough University days, and we're all good friends. We meet up, and a lot of them were saying, like, he's never hit in a team final, like, they made a mistake, they shouldn't have picked him. And I was, like we spoke before, I just don't think you can, and this is a personal thing, because this was something that was used with me post-2012 after the mistake that I made in the team final. When it would come to a team selection, there was always this, someone would pipe up with in those selection meetings, and I wasn't privy to them, I wasn't there, but I would get told about it afterwards from Sergey. There was always someone that would say, yeah, but he fell under pressure in the team. I don't think you can do that, because, like, every situation is unique to that time, and you should always go on who is in the best form at that moment with the momentum. It's difficult to know, and it was the same thing with the 2014 Europeans. Lewis has come back onto the scene, and we spoke about this on the podcast, me and Lewis, so I don't mind talking about it, but he comes back onto the scene, hasn't seen how I've been training for 2 years, and he's like, look, I should have qualified for this team, why have they selected Sam? And I'm like, in my head, you're not seeing the way I'm training here, like, I'm training... This is the best I've ever trained. So then, and the great thing was, a bit like Stephen, I then went and hit 4 out of 4 routines at Europeans, stuck everything, and in many ways was it was a bit of a redemption, because I was quite an anchor on that day, because we had some other teammates on that day that made mistakes, but I kind of held it together. So I don't think, and that's a personal thing from me, you can really say, of course it's a factor, but... you have to go on who's ready in that, because it changes so fast. You know this. Like, as soon as it could take you 6 months to get into the best shape of your life. You lose it in 2 weeks if you don't train. It's gone in 2 weeks. Yeah. But you can turn things around so fast. We've just had Kelly Sim on the podcast. She went from going to the European Games having the worst competition of her life to a week later winning the World University Games, having the best competition of her life. Like, it can change fast. So you have to go on, like, right then at that point. That's why I thought it was interesting that we selected the team so early this time. Yeah. Which was different to historically we would select a team quite late. In London, it was just 1 month before we had the final trials for the Olympic Games, because you kind of want to pick the best team at the time. But yes, it was really interesting, obviously, with going into those last rotations. But with Stephen doing that, I do think, with America being so... there is almost more pressure on the American team, I think, given the fact that they've got such a long-standing history. And because the American women are so good,
Yeah.
the American men,
That's a
it's
good
often,
point, actually.
they're so good. They win everything. That must be hard. Do you know what I mean? As the American guys, because you're like, wow, they're getting all this attention, all of this exposure. They've got the biggest sports person in the world at the moment in Simone Biles.
Yeah.
And we're just feeding off scraps. Like, we don't want to be the guys that... I don't want to be the man that lets down Team USA again and we miss that medal chance. We've got to wait 4 more years.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that pressure for him to hit, incredible. Credit to their team. Credit to the selectors as well for going with the mathematical team. You know, there were a lot of people that after the team selection thought, potentially they shouldn't have done that. They should have given themselves a bit more leeway to put other people in the team.
Yeah.
But they went with it, and it's worked, right?
Yeah.
Like, it worked. Like, on maths, best team, 18 for 18 routines. So it's going to be interesting. And the same thing again for the Japanese. They did a very similar selection process with a few more different caveats and rules, but essentially picked the strongest team on paper.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see if other teams now maybe follow suit moving forward, because there'll be a changing of the guard, particularly in GB, right? Like the head national coach Paul Hall said that he's stepping down, so there's going to be a change over in personnel and who's going to head the program for the next 4 years. It will be interesting to see if there's a shift in the way they select teams, and they maybe follow the model of the Americans or the Japanese a little bit more closely.
Just quickly on that point of making a decision and it going right, there was a phenomenon that Justin Spring in Illinois told me about called I think we may have spoken about this, but every Tuesday we did a takeaway Tuesday where guys had to do find a quote from the internet or find some interesting piece of information, then we talk about it, a discussion every Tuesday. And one of these phenomena was this concept called resulting, and it was based off NFL. You know, there are 2 teams. I'll butcher the numbers and the scores. I don't follow American football, but it was like you imagine the scenario. It's close to the end of the game. There's not many points in it. One team is down, but they have the ball and they have to make a play. And the only way they win is if they score the touchdown and then score a field goal, whatever it is, and they win by 1 point. So the quarterback throws the ball. It's caught in the end zone, and it's a touchdown. And everyone goes, "What a great decision that was to make that play." But imagine the exact same scenario where that play is made and they miss. Everyone criticizes the execution of, the plan. The plan's exactly the same play, but the result is just different. And in one scenario it's successful, in the other scenario it's not. And then you could do the same the other way around, where you do a different play and it works out, and someone goes, "Wow, that was such an amazing call to change it up at the last minute."
Yeah.
But then again, they go, "Why did they change it? They just failed." A bit like England bringing on subs. I'm sure everyone was in support of the subs coming on and being like, Southgate's making the right call here with the subs. So imagine those subs were brought on and there were no goals, and he kept bringing subs on, people would keep saying, "What's happening here?" I think that with Stephen and the selection process, it's very easy to criticise and go, he doesn't deserve this, or whatever the situation is, or I don't think the team should have been that. And then you can see the team final unfold, and then it comes down to Stephen, and he gets the bronze medal for the US, and it was a team, but he seals the deal. And then people will go, "What a great decision it was to put him in the team." Or if he hadn't have done it, imagine the backlash that he would have got, and the selectors would have got if he didn't do that routine right at the end. So the build-up and the plan can be exactly the same, but people focus on the result, which needs some attention. I get it. But it's 99% of the work already been done. As you know, that last routine, you could be in the best shape of your life, and then you come up, you do a pommel routine, you fall, and you lose the bronze medal for your country, and someone goes, that was bound to happen, or you win it, and you go, So people don't quite understand, I think, that all the journey that he's been on to then actually can do it right at the end, credit to him for that, because he deserves that, and he deserves it for his country.
And maybe that's why you need somebody in that situation that maybe has the mindset and outlook that you've described, that you've heard he has in that happy-go-lucky, like, I'm not going to listen to that anyway, because that's a perfect example of why you shouldn't listen. You should be very wary of listening to the criticism, because one day you can be the hero and the next day you can be the villain. And it can be the same person.
Yeah, imagine if he'd have come out hot against it,
exactly,
and then fallen.
So you really do, and when you spoke in the beginning, to circle back around to the beginning, like, the difference is, it really is focusing on your own. And that's the same in life, like, focus on what you can control, what you can do. Because if you're focused on everybody else, everybody is always going to have an opinion, so you have to really, like, learn that, like, understand what that is, and that opinion lasts for 2 seconds and then it's gone in the wind.
Yeah.
And that person moves on to the next thing that's going on in their life. So, yeah, really, really interesting point there, mate. And Justin was commentating on the Olympic Games.
He was,
as well.
yeah.
He was commentating on the Olympic Games. And he was one of the members in Beijing that won the team bronze medal as well.
I bet that would have been quite an amazing moment. You were talking about USA starting on rings in Beijing. Starting on pommels in London, and then getting the actual... That must have been an amazing moment for Justin to see.
Oh yeah, to watch
see his team.
Wow, that's gone full circle.
Yeah, and
he'd
have watched most of those guys go through college too. I know he's in women's NCAA at the moment, but Asher Hong came on a recruiting trip to Illinois. We all sort of know who people are, and I competed against Paul in the NCAA for a couple of years. I think he was the class underneath me, so I watched him compete against him in finals, and then see him go and do.
It's great for college gymnastics in America as well, right?
Yeah,
great.
It continues to affirm the fact that I know there's probably people out there who could tell me off the top of their head which guys haven't been to college that also made the Olympic team, but Fred, Asher, Paul, help me out, who's Stephen, and the fifth member is...
Of the American team, Brody Malone.
Brody, all college gymnasts. And then looking at Tokyo too, Shane, Brody, Yule... Who else?
Who was the team in Tokyo?
Shane, Brody, because it was only 4 guys, wasn't it?
It was only 4. I'm trying to think.
Donnell? No, not Donnell. Was it Donnell?
I can't remember.
That's
who was the
awful.
4-man team.
You should know that too.
I should know that, being me and my memory, but I didn't really watch much of Tokyo, so that's where my
but
brain's
anyway,
going.
it's
We're going to get slaughtered in the comments.
Yeah, I know, right?
Bring it on.
They've got an incredible system, and actually, you look at it, GB produce... this whole thing that you were talking about with the Japanese having 40 guys over 80, the Americans having 13 or so, was it? And then us having 3 at the national champs.
Oh yeah, 3. 3.
This cycle, each country produces gymnastics of basically the same standard. I know there's differences in pieces, and I think from a nation perspective, China have got rings and P-bars on lock. GB have got floor and vault. America, I don't see a standout piece from them, but consistently they've been raising the standard of everything.
Yep.
They're certainly not that country who's weak at pommels anymore.
No.
It's
taken them a while to shake that, hasn't it, as well?
Even with a bronze medal from Nedor in 2016, they're still like, it's America on pommel.
Yeah.
Stephen's actually the face of it now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not sure where I was going with that, but
the depth.
Yeah. So, GB produce amazing gymnastics.
Yeah.
Look at the standard that we've got. So do America, but the depth. It's so interesting to see which almost equation countries are using to produce the answer that's closest to their truth.
And I imagine if you were to really look at that and break it down, it will be very unique to the nation, their set of circumstances, how everything's structured,
philosophy,
how they fund their athletes, the culture is quite unique to that. That's a really interesting point, mate. Let's finally then let's touch on high bar. So we go into high bar. You're pretty confident with China. I'm still thinking, look, they're going to win, but there could be a few mistakes. Zhao Ruteng goes up, does his routine pretty well. It was interesting. He did his quast, and he went a bit funny on his quast. And I thought, oh, that was odd, but his dismount will be fine. And then does his dismount, just opens quite early, almost head up a bit, and knees drop. And it's such a common mistake in a team final on high bar for people to go forwards on their dismount. For some reason, it's like the end of a pommel routine when you think you've made it and then you fall on the dismount. It's a bit of that, I think. And he just drops his knees, and you're kind of looking, going, are they giving that a fall? Because both knees touched.
So is that maybe the contention with the start value then?
I don't think that was... No, it had to be something structurally. Okay. It was high bar, because originally they gave him a 13, and I went, wow. The first Japanese went up, Sugino, and hit a 14.5, did his full difficulty under pressure, which, like, credit to him. And then, so there's a 1.5 gap, then they raise Xiao Ruteng's score. For everybody listening, the only score that can get changed is the difficulty, not what the judges give the execution. So it's only the difficulty that can change. So that's the only thing you can protest as a team.
Which is wild when you think that an opinion can't be challenged.
Yeah, which is
when
crazy,
you literally
right?
think about subjective opinion becomes objective score.
Yeah. And I always go back to that conversation with that judge of who decides Olympic champion. The judges decide. I'm like, oh yeah, the judges do decide. So you go up, and there's a 1.5 gap. His score gets raised to 13.4. It reduces to 1.1. Still got a 2-mark buffer. Or a 3-mark buffer. I'm thinking, still, they've got it in the bag. And then, he goes up, Sue Wade, and for me, just doesn't look that confident. Does the hard job of catching his Lukin, and then that Kachev, that can happen on Kachev, can't it? Like, was it too you close? You come in too close, you don't get your dowels round, you go thumbs, and you're kind of not looking at the bar, you just catch, and and before you know it, you're like, how the hell's that happened? Very similar to myself in London. It was, I was like a fingertips just away.
Yeah.
My head just tilted back a bit. My squat half was slightly late, and my action just went a bit late. Head went, and it was just like reaching for it. But then in that moment, you have to go, calm down, think, what am I going to do construction-wise? Am I going to do the skill again, or am I going to leave it and move on? And I have to now go through. And it just felt like on that second
Coleman,
fall,
right?
He's panicked and brought it in close. He's coming close, right? And similar fall, if you look at it again, it's like head in, just snatch hands at it, no thumbs, and just...
Yeah.
And I mean, I feel obviously 11-6. And at that point, you can see the Chinese know, and then... Again, credit to the Japanese to go up, hit those routines.
Oh, yeah, true.
Because they've got to hit. You still have to hit. Someone can give you that opportunity. You've still got to go out and do it. And then, Bo Heng Zhang goes out, does a good routine, takes a step. Definitely not the cleanest routine. But Hashimoto then has got the pressure on him to go and hit his routine. Tactically makes a very good decision, does an easier routine, but still chooses to connect the squat half Lukin, which I would imagine is because he doesn't have another option in terms of construction. So he's probably started that routine by going back at rise, change hand so many times. For him to now start with back at rise top into his casino will throw him. So he's got no choice but to connect the Lukin.
Also, I think
does that make sense?
He wouldn't have been able to do straight and then straddle. Yeah. Because did he do straddle?
So he did...
Because you can do three.
I think he did straight, maybe didn't do straddle, chose to leave the squat full out. That's where his D score was down.
Right.
Only did a 6 D score. So essentially kept his lutin the same.
Squat half Lukin,
but
casino.
Took out
straight.
2 of the last elements.
Yeah.
Did his dismount.
Beautiful course.
Did a great routine.
Yeah.
Didn't
stick it either, though.
Didn't stick it. It was kind of like one of those wobble stand-ups. But at that point they'd done it, and you see it's really interesting, isn't it, how the Japanese demeanor has changed over the past 10 years. They're now screaming,
crying.
Like Kazuma Kaya is always the most emotional guy ever. When he does routine, he's going mad. But obviously they back it up, man. And incredible to see that comeback. What a comeback. Great for the sport in terms of the excitement.
Yeah.
I think my takeaways from the competition would be that we are missing Russia, and regardless of the political tensions or whatever your opinions are on that in the world, in terms of just having another team that is very competitive with China and Japan, and just the overall depth and quality, we're missing their gymnastics. And hopefully in 4 years' time, the situation there will have been resolved to a point in which they can compete again.
Yeah,
We don't know how long this is going to go on, right? It's not the first time you think of countries boycotting the Olympics in the 80s, so we don't know. I think we do miss that gymnastics because it's a style of gymnastics that can compete with Japan and China, but it's very Western.
Yeah.
It's a distinctly Russian gymnastics. It's distinctly Western gymnastics. I know that, there's a conversation about whether Russia are now considering the West or whatever that is, but in terms of the gymnastic style, is very different. Yeah. It looks different. It's more of that classic kind of, that old Soviet kind of, they all do ballet training. Do you know what I mean? It's that artistry. There's a lot of artistry in the Russian gymnastics, but they're difficult. You can compete with those two powerhouses. So it will be good, hopefully, if everything gets resolved, to see them again in 4 years' time. That was my takeaway in terms of that, like, moving forward. I think in terms of the GB team moving forwards, I would like to see there be an emphasis on the team from the beginning of a cycle, because I personally don't feel like, I think post-London, when I reflect and look back now, if we were to have made a mistake, and it's not a mistake because the team in Rio did incredibly well and they were very, very close to winning another Olympic medal. And I would argue again that team was stronger than the team in London, and everybody else just improved. But there was no clear common goal of, we're going to try and improve from a bronze team medal to a silver or a gold. Those conversations didn't take place. So it was almost like we didn't really know what the common goal was. Yeah. We just we all knew we're trying to get better and improve, but it wasn't like written down in ink, right, we're all working towards this. And I think that would be the same since. I don't think that's been the case.
Yeah.
I sat down post the changeover of Paul Hall coming in, and I again don't think we had those conversations about what the clear common goal was as a collective. I would like to see that. I would like to see a real emphasis on, right, this next Olympic cycle going into LA, we want to win an Olympic team medal. Like, that's our focus. We're going to build a strong team, and then everything else after that almost becomes a byproduct. I would like to see that, because I do think that makes a difference, and I think USA have done that, clearly done that, focused on the team. And I think, for me, you have an individual that wins an Olympic medal, it's incredible for your country and your sport, and overnight you've now got all of these kids that have a role model. But if you win a team, you go from having one person with an Olympic medal to 5. You've now got 5 role models. What an incredible thing that is, because all 5 of those athletes might be from 5 different clubs. That's 5 lots of 1,000 children they're inspiring, and then that has a ripple effect in their area, and more kids get into gymnastics, and then that's what is a huge groundswell within the sport. So I think that, for me, not just for, I'm biased obviously because I was part of great teams and we won team medals, but for the sport, I think winning a team medal is so powerful, especially for that younger generation coming up. And I do like the idea of having a common goal and being as part of a team, and it not necessarily being all about me and myself and my aspirations, even though when you go up there you are competing on your own and it's up to you. I do like that. I think there needs to be something that's bigger than yourself. So for me, they were probably my big takeaways from the competition. But I think the one thing I will finish with is that all of the guys from the GB team that competed and are going to compete again in individual all-around finals and apparatus finals either equaled their scores or bettered them, which is huge. That's a massive positive.
Regardless of a fall, right?
Yeah, so if you think about in terms of the individual, so the 6 apparatus finals we've got, all of those guys equaled their scores within half a tenth, or bettered their scores from qualification going into those event finals. And I think that will play a huge role going into those apparatus finals. I think they'll be quite hungry. And I think they've now hit 2 clean routines on their apparatus, which is going to be massive going into those event finals. So I expect big things. I did predict 4 medals for the GB team. I still think we're in a shout. We've got 2 opportunities on floor, 2 opportunities on vault. You never know. Could be an outside chance in the all-around with how it plays out. An all-around final you can often have a finish like yesterday in the team final. And then obviously in the apparatus finals, we've got Harry on rings. you never know. I don't think he's quite got the difficulty yet to compete with the very best guys, but 14.8 is certainly up there. And if everybody takes steps on the dismounted sticks, could be there. And then Max, you cannot count out. Obviously, Max, he's hit the highest score of the championship so far in that team final yesterday. So I still think we've got a shot at 4. It's hard to replicate that in an actual final setting because you tend to see the medals get spread out a lot more. But I think they did incredibly well. Very proud of them. They should be very proud of themselves. And I think positive things for the future for sure, especially with us having the junior European champions now as a team again. I think those young guys will look at that and be very inspired by those performances and want to be part of it, but also go one step further in 4 years' time. They were my big takeaways, mate. Anything you'd like to finish up on?
Yeah, just some of that too. Proud. I don't say... I think using the word proud is... You don't want to try and communicate that you're necessarily above someone looking down, like, oh, I'm proud of someone younger than me having done something. You know, I'm proud of my friends that have gone out and done that. I think that I remember watching Joe in, was it Liverpool, in the all-around final. He didn't have the strongest competition. Very uncharacteristic of him, actually. I think he was in the 70s or whatever, just had a bit of a meltdown. And I remember thinking, like, I don't care how Joe's done. I'm so proud of him anyway. You know, I would have felt the same pride if he'd absolutely smashed it that particular day versus the day that he actually did have. Yeah. And the same thing yesterday. You know, I suppose I know Joe the best out of that team, and it was just, they could have done it or not, and that's not to say that the result didn't matter, but I think I'm almost a bit detached, a bit unemotional from this, and I can see the truly for what it is, and what it is a sport that's incredibly difficult. The pressure that guys are under to perform, and to take their life work and present it on a single day, and face, you know, criticism, the judges, the pressure, the crowd, everything. So I was just so proud of them, that the way that they competed. And if they'd have got a medal, amazing. Yeah. If they didn't, like we didn't, they're still amazing gymnasts. They still deserve the world. Like they are. Watching that team final, we just missed out. But GB are one of the best gymnastics nations in the world, and in terms of Great Britain as a collective, you know, what Olympic sports are we competitive on? Historically, you'd probably say cycling, swimming. You know, there's some huge names, but gymnastics. You know, people pay attention because a lot of people come into the Olympics and tune into the gymnastics every 4 years because it looks cool and it's amazing. And I'm so impressed. But you should be. Like, you know, the level of gymnastics that the GB boys are doing is up there with the world's absolute
and
best.
Our gymnastics is very well respected now, I think. You know, really well respected. And then, you know, one thing that's important to point out is that in a sport like gymnastics, there are only 8 gold medals up for grabs. How many gold medals are up for grabs in swimming?
How many up for grabs? Won 8 in one. One.
How many are up in cycling? There's only 8 to win. You know, it's not a lot of opportunities. So I think we do incredibly well to be as successful as we are for a country that's so small, that doesn't have a long-standing history in the sport. I think we're always punching above where we should be. And I'm excited for the future and very much looking forward to the rest of the competition. So thank you, mate, for joining us. It's been a really, really insightful conversation. You've been absolutely brilliant to have a chat about. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. It's been one of my favourite
just two gymnastics
conversations.
Nerds, really.
Just two gymnastics nerds just chatting. But no, it's been brilliant, mate. And all the best for the rest of the year and going into 2025. I know you've got some exciting things coming up with starting at Loughborough University, which is really, really cool. So it's great to see you doing that. And obviously you guys at Nottingham went and won the British team title of the Adams Shield, which is credit to the way you all prepared and trained for that in an Olympic year. So I'm very excited to see things and see the progress and get back into the gym myself over the summer now. I've got a bit more free time to start doing some training. I'm getting the itch a little bit. I saw Dan Keaton's doing a Kachev on his Instagram story this morning. I was like, whoa, I want to do a Kovac, man. I'm fed up of like being in schools and watching the video of my final high bar routine and being like, I want to do that again. Let's see if we can do it. So, yeah, I'm going to see you in the gym in the next few weeks, mate. But thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. And
Of course, man.
thank you, everybody,
Always.
for listening. We're going to have a few more episodes over the Olympics. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Please leave us some feedback. Make sure you're subscribing. Make sure you're following Hamish on social media, on Instagram. 2 years' time, there's going to be a big Commonwealth Games coming up. I'm excited to support you along that journey. But, yeah, thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the Olympic Games. Top man.
Cheers, bro.